surrounding me, rock surrounding me, beat, 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 side, beat, 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 side. Although these words are very puzzling and confusing to hear, for me, they just keep motivating me and driving me to fight against African American injustice, such as the KKK. Because in 1996, I single-handedly shut down one of these injustice shops because I am the Reverend David Kennedy.
Three percent of the people at UCLA are African American, and I was a part of that 3%. At that college, I found my passion for film and joined a generation of black students in a filming program, and we were called the LA Rebellions. From there, I created my most famous film, Daughters of the Dust, and became the first African American woman to receive a theatrical release for that film. I am Julie Dash. Cut!
The United States remains forever indebted to the World War II veterans who demonstrated selfless service and sacrifice in defense of global peace and security. We remember the legacy, the greatest generation, by honoring the past, securing the future. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the singing of the national anthem by Specialist Alexis Monroe and remain standing for the invocation given by Chaplain Captain Deborah Frick of the 165th Infantry Brigade.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watch were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave for the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Please join me in prayer based upon your belief. God of all creation, we bow before you, full of awe. Today we remember and recognize the powerful and important achievements Black and African Americans have made, and those who have fought courageously against the stereotyping, racism, and hatred, and died to change the world for us and for our children. On this day, we recommit ourselves to the effort for justice and equality for all, not just for the people we know, but for all who may face and suffer oppression. We ask you for your blessing upon our time together and program, our speaker and food. In the name of Almighty God, amen.
Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, the commander of the 165th Infantry Brigade, Colonel Eric C. Flesh.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of Fort Jackson's command team, Brigadier General Beagle, Command Sergeant Major Dan, welcome to our African American Black History Month observance. So look out across here. I didn't know we could jam this many tables into the NCO club. So great representation. And thank you again for all coming. It's good to see such a large crowd. I want to quickly point out some of our special guests and distinguished visitors in this crowd. It was my honor to see them on the list and shake hands with some of them today, and just to let you all know how big an event this is and the folks that came in to help us celebrate. First of all, our guest speaker, Dr. Bobby Donaldson from the University of South Carolina. Sir, thank you for coming. Along with him, his guests that include Mr. Creswell Elmore, the son of George Elmore, which we'll get into. Dr. Donaldson is going to educate us on some of this later, but whose actions led to voters' rights here in South Carolina. Also, Mr. Robert Young, nephew of Isaac Woodward, who, a World War II veteran, his action in case with the police here in South Carolina led to and inspired some of the civil rights movements here in the Southeast and across the nation. We also have Mr. Larry Ward, District Aide to Congressman Clyburn, Miss Susan McPherson, Director of Government Relations and Military Affairs, Sergeant Major Retired Bob Johnson, USA Executive Committee Vice President for Programs and Awards. Also today visiting is Ms. Dolores DaCosta, South Carolina's Executive Director for the Commission of Minority Affairs. Mr. Baron Davis, the Superintendent of Richland II School District. Thank you all for coming. In addition, we also have some very special groups that have come today. A few of them I've got to interact with before at other military installations have always been added to the events and rallies and recognitions we've had. And today we have representation from the Triple Nickel Parachute Infantry Association, the South Carolina Buffalo Soldiers Motorcycle Club, the Kappa Epsilon Psi Military Sorority, and the Kappa Lambda Chi Military Fraternity. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for all attending. This year's theme is honoring the past, securing the future. It is our hope today that we will assist you in honoring our past, our nation, and our Army's history. By highlighting those contributions from the African American community that has shaped who and what we are, each and every one of us here at Fort Jackson. And like today and every day, Fort Jackson and all of you associated with it are part of our nation's securing the future. So I'm the only thing separating you from the food that's lined up. So please enjoy today's event and enjoy the lunch that's been prepared for you. Thank you.
At this time, we will prepare ourselves for today's meal, brought to you courtesy of Fort Jackson's NCO Club. Enjoying your meal, please focus your attention to the center of the floor for our entertainment called Drum Sermons. Brought to you by the Orisi Risi African Folklore, led by founders Don and Tutu Horel. Orisi Risi African Folklore is an awe-inspiring African adventure rooted in the history, culture, and traditions of Africa, inclusive of folktales, legends, myths, spirited drumming, dance, and song.
Hello, everybody. All right, thank you guys for having us. Adeo, Adeo, àwa mà dé o, àwa kò lè dé o, kò ní ilẹ̀ máa mọ̀ o. Àwa kò lè dé o, kò ní ilẹ̀ máa mọ̀ o. Adeo, yé paripa. Adeo, àwa mà dé o, àwa kò lè dé o, kò ní ilẹ̀ máa mọ̀ o. Mi ò gbọ́, àwa kò lè dé o, kò ní ilẹ̀ máa mọ̀ o. Ṣé bàbá? Àwa kò lè dé o, kò ní ilẹ̀ máa mọ̀ o. Everybody, time I would like everyone to, I would say, everybody dance. You will get up and get your All right, thank you. And this is your response. Your response is going to be, Ashe, Ashe. Are you guys ready? Yeah. Okay, let's do it. Fuwa Alafia.
Ashe, Ashe.
Fuwa Alafia.
Ashe, Ashe.
Fuwa Alafia.
Ashe, Ashe.
Fuwa Alafia.
Ashe, Ashe.
Now you got it. So after I say everybody dance, you get up, do your thing. Get your thing. You know, you can do the dab, you can do the cross. Yes. Yes. Let's get in the groove. Thank you. I love you.
was no music. There were no drums, but there was sound. And in those days, people would gather to witness the rising sun. As the sun rose in the morning sky, they made sounds that also rose in crescendo to greet it. In time, they learned to cup their hands and to beat their mouths to give this sound rhythm. When the sun came into full view, they would cease this wordless singing and disband, only to meet again at the next rising sun. This practice has gone on for time immemorial, and it continues to this very day. When people learned to keep animals to meet some of their needs, and use were found for the skins or the hides they were used to make drums, they were pegged to the ground, and then they were stretched to dry. To check on them as the afternoon wore on, 4 men with long whips would take turns, rhythmically beating them as they circled in counterclockwise direction. These were the forebearers of all musicians and all drummers, who were called the Alawo. One day, one of the Alawo was on his way to the next village to visit his family. As he traveled along the lonely footpath, joined town to town and village to village, he heard a voice that said, "Alawo, why?" which meant Skimby to come. The man turned around, but he didn't see anyone, so he walked on. Then the voice said, "Alawo, padawa," Skimby to come back. So the man walked back, and from a tree that strangely grew along the path, he heard a voice, and it said, "Alawo, I am the spirit of music. There's a hollow in the tree. That's where I live. Please cut it down so that I can escape. And I promise I will teach you how to make something that can be understood by all humankind." This was important then as it is today. So the man quickly took his machete and he cut the tree down, and true to his word, according to legend, the spirit of music first appeared and taught him how to make the very first musical instrument. As you might imagine, it was a drum. The spirit of music showed him how to cut the tree into segments about from his knee to his heel. It showed him how to further hollow out the section of tree, how to attack some of the skin or hide, and then the spirit of music showed the man how to make sounds with this curious looking thing, especially those that imitated the human voice. But it told him, from now on you must call yourself Onilu, which is a Yoruba word for drummer. The spirit of music went further to say to the first drummer, who by the way we call Baba Onilu, father of the drum. When you play your drum, think of your song, and I will sing it for you. When people hear it, they'll come together as one. They'll learn new important things, and they will be made better prepared to stand the test of time. So when Baba got back to his village, he played the drum for the very first time. I can imagine it sounded a bit like this.
Please give another round of applause to the Orisi Risi African Folklore for their exceptional performance. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Flesh will now introduce today's guest speaker.
How about another round of applause for Reese Reese? Anybody who can get this song made up again? We're very fortunate today, and it's my honor to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Bobby Donaldson. He's the Director of Civil Rights History and Research, as well as Associate Professor at the University of South Carolina. His many academic achievements, awards, and accolades are in his full bio in your programs. Please take a look. It is remarkable. I'm not going to steal any more time because in my brief meeting with Dr. Donaldson, I learned so much. And I'm eager to take my seat to be educated again by this great historian. We're very fortunate to have with us here today to celebrate. Please give a warm Fort Jackson welcome to Dr. Donaldson.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Colonel Flesh, thank you very much for the introduction, and to Commanding General Beagle for the invitation to be here. I also would like to thank especially Sergeant Jenkins for her work in making this possible, in collaboration with our colleague Natasha Saunders. I especially would like on this afternoon to salute the students of the Longleaf Middle School. Those young people This is my second opportunity to speak at Fort Jackson for this occasion. Today, as I did a few years ago, I would like to reflect on our theme this year, honoring the past and securing the future, by speaking about individuals who have shaped this state and this nation. I want to begin with a reflection to remind us why we acknowledge and why we celebrate African American History Month. The date was October 31st, 1937, in Washington, D.C. The occasion was a meeting of an organization entitled the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, founded by the eminent scholar Dr. Carter G. Woodson. The keynote speaker that day was a woman who was born in 1875 in the small community of Maysville, South Carolina, in Sumter County. By 1937, she was an esteemed educator, college president, and civil rights activist. Her name was Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. Dr. Bethune offered a speech entitled Clarifying Our Vision with Facts. She spoke about the grave challenges of the Great Depression. She talked about the heart-rending and fearsome difficulties experienced by African Americans. And she also talked about the need to delve more deeply into the struggles and the triumphs and the contributions of African Americans to this nation. She says the following: if our people are to fight their way out of bondage, we must arm them with the sword and the shield. And that sword and shield is their history. She says we must give them belief in themselves and their possibilities based on the sure knowledge of the past. That we must do this every day, from the cradle to the grave, from kindergarten to college. And we must do this because it is our obligation and our sacred duty. Now, Dr. Bethune and Dr. Woodson began an initiative in the early part of the 20th century called Negro History Week that has now evolved into African American History Month. This article is from 1953. I want you to remember that year in just a few moments. Now, I come today wearing several hats. Today, I come also as the project scholar for Columbia SC 63, a project established in the year 2012 by Columbia's first African-American mayor, Mayor Stephen Benjamin. And Mayor Benjamin wanted this project to document the struggle for civil rights and social justice in Columbia, South Carolina. I also come today as the project director of the Center for Civil Rights History and Research housed at the University of South Carolina. This center was formed at the direct request of Congressman James Clyburn. And I'm very pleased today that one of his aides, Larry Ward, is here today. Congressman Clyburn said, I want to give the university my papers. What, how many boxes, Larry? 100 boxes and more coming. But only if there is a center established at the university where these documents can be used for research and the training of young minds. And you'll notice that the theme of the Civil Rights Center is learning the lessons of our past to build a better future. That echoes very much the theme of today's events. So as I thought about the time allotted to me this afternoon, I'm reminded that some of my students call me a Baptist professor. And that means I can stand here all day. But I know how much time we have. So let me remind you where we are today. We're on the grounds of Camp Jackson. Today, as we think about honoring the past, we honor the African Americans who were part of this installation, who literally built Camp Jackson, who cut the trees, who dug trenches, who laid the roads. Over 300 African Americans employed with meager wages on these grounds, living in discarded National Guard tents, helped to quickly build Camp Jackson in 1917. We honor the African Americans who sought to fight in World War II and who sought to serve at Camp Jackson, even when the governor of the state of South Carolina, Governor Richard Manning, was adamant in August of 1917, quote, that no Negro and Puerto Ricans should be mobilized at the same camp as white soldiers. The governor said he would protest to the highest levels. He was joined in 1917 by the United States senators and every member of Congress who petitioned the president that this camp not have black, Puerto Rican, and white soldiers. Now, despite the protests, what occurred was these young men who were part of the famous 371st were indeed trained at Camp Jackson, who served with valor despite extraordinary circumstances, who served with distinction, including a young man whose name was Captain Corporal Freddie Stowers of Sandy Springs. Freddie Stowers, who was told that he did not have the intellect or the physical ability to fight, indeed fought in France and lost his life in September of 1918 and was later, many years later, awarded the Medal of Honor and the Purple Heart. A young man who joined Freddie Stowers, among the 371st was a private who was from a little small town called Enoree, South Carolina, whose name was Private Walter Beagles. And one imagines over 102 years ago, if Private Walter Beagles, working on these grounds, would ever imagine one day when his great-grandson would be the commanding general of Fort Jackson in 2020. There is for us a story to tell, a history to document about the critical role African Americans played in America's military. There is a story to tell about a young man who entered the military on October the 14th, 1942, at 23 years old. A young man who did his basic training at Fort Jackson. A young man who served with honor and distinction in the Pacific Theater. A young man who on February the 12th, 1946, was discharged at Camp Gordon, today Fort Gordon, in Augusta, Georgia. That young man was discharged and boarded a Greyhound bus in Augusta. He sought to reunite with his family in Winsboro and in North Carolina. But in the route from Augusta to Winsboro, the young man told a bus driver that he needed to go to the restroom. There was an encounter and a confrontation between the young man, still in his uniform, and the bus driver. When they got to the small community of Batesburg, South Carolina, a police officer confronts recently discharged Sergeant Isaac Woodard and beats the soldier in his uniform severely to the point of gouging out his eyes and blinding him permanently. Imagine that. You have served with distinction in World War II. You have been discharged. And on the very day you are discharged, you encounter battle yet again in Batesburg. There are charges filed against the officers in Batesburg, and ultimately, after a 30-minute jury trial, Isaac Woodard's assailants are found not guilty. Did I do something wrong with that? They are found not guilty. But on the day of the trial, Isaac Woodard said the following. He said, Negro veterans that fought in this war don't realize that the real battle has just begun in America. They went overseas and did their duty, and now they're home and have to fight another struggle. Isaac Woodard said to a reporter, he said, I may be blind, but I have an unbeaten spirit. Someone who joined Isaac Woodard's defense was a heavyweight champion of the world named Joe Louis. Joe Louis said the following, nobody in America should have to go through second-class citizenship. Me and a whole lot of black guys went out fighting for the American cause, and now we're going to have to get America to give us our civil rights. We earned them. But the irony of ironies is that the brutality experienced by Isaac Woodard came to the attention of President Harry Truman. And in July of 1948, after the objection of senior military officers, President Truman issued Executive Order 9981 that banned racial discrimination in the United States Armed Forces, 1948. So by 1953, in a short window of time, these are soldiers trained at Fort Jackson in 1953. Isaac Woodard's assailants were found not guilty. Dr. Andrew Myers, who's here today from USC Upstate, and others, a new aspect of his story is being told. It's being told now in Batesburg. To the very space where Isaac Woodard was beaten and blinded. Just this past year, a marker, a portion of which is written in Braille, documents the struggle and the contributions of Isaac Woodard. Now, what made that day so powerful for me as I sat there is as we walked through the town of Batesburg, in the very route that Isaac Woodard took from the bus to the jail, we were joined by our military from across the state and the country. We were joined that day by the great-grandson of Private Walter Beagles that day. A marker was installed. Remarks were given. But the most powerful moment of that day for me was when an 80-plus-year-old Army veteran stands up and speaks about his uncle. That Army veteran's name was Robert Young, a nephew of Sergeant Isaac Woodard, who talked about his uncle's struggles. And today, as we think about honoring our past, we honor also the contribution of the Woodard and Young family in keeping this story alive. And today, here at Fort Jackson, we're very pleased to have Army veteran Robert Young with us this afternoon. Mr. Young, come forward and receive. I just want you all to see him. A portion of Isaac Woodard's trial occurred here in Columbia in August of 1946. Within a week span of that trial being heard in Columbia, a local journalist and photographer also stepped into the books of history. His name was George Elmore. Mr. Elmore was a photographer, the owner of a store, a taxi cab driver, a father, and a strong activist in the NAACP and a group called the Progressive Democratic Party. In August of 1946, it was illegal for an African American to vote in the Democratic Party of South Carolina. But George Elmore and others sought to fight against this illegality. So in August of 1946, George Elmore files a lawsuit against the South Carolina Democratic Party and ultimately proves successful in his victory. In 1947, a federal judge, J. Wadey's Waring, the same judge who sat during the trial of Isaac Woodard, who knew that the policemen were guilty and was shocked by the decision of the jury. That same judge sided on behalf of George Elmore and called segregation in the Democratic Party unconstitutional. So George Elmore is among the first to vote as a Democrat in South Carolina in August of 1948. where thousands of African Americans joined with others across the state to vote in the Democratic Party. One of those persons who voted that day was the woman that you see in the photograph with the umbrella at the front of the line. One of my great teachers. Her name was Donella Brown Wilson. Miss Wilson was born in 1909 in a little area called Fort Mott in Calhoun County, South Carolina. Miss Wilson voted at age 39 in August of 1948. And she did not miss an election until she died at the age of 109 years old. But she told me once that she was very proud of all the work that we were doing, all the research that we were compiling. But she said, "Doc, history means nothing unless you use it." History means nothing unless you use it. It was Ms. Wilson who reminded us that George Elmore won his lawsuit, but George Elmore faced indignity upon indignity for the work he did. He loses his grocery store. He loses his home. There's grave sickness in his family, and he dies an early death at age 53 years old in 1959. But now his story lingers on. Now we continue to document the important contributions of George Elmore. And a critical agent in preserving the history and the legacy of this decorated civil rights veteran is his son, Cresswell Elmore. And I am very grateful today that he made the journey from North Carolina to be here today as we honor the important legacy of his father. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Cresswell Elmore. Periodically, Mr. Elmore and I exchange texts and emails, and I'll send him things that I've discovered about his father, and he'll send me things that he's discovered about his father. And one day, he sent me this photograph. It's a photograph of Harry S. Truman in June of 1947, speaking before a group of the NAACP at the Lincoln Memorial. When this photograph was taken, he was already contemplating the Executive Order 9981. These are the words he said the day this photograph was taken. A photograph taken by Mr. George Elmore. As Americans, we believe that every man should be free to live his life as he wishes. He should be limited only by his responsibility to his fellow man. The only limit to an American's achievement should be his ability, his industry, and his character. And when I say all Americans, I mean all Americans. That photograph taken in 1947 sets the stage for a critical moment that was brought to our attention by my colleague, Dr. Andrew Myers, who's here. In the desegregating of the military, perhaps Fort Jackson witnesses the largest integration of scale at that time. In 1953, there's an important episode worth underscoring on a day like today as we honor the past. It's a story that takes place on Thanksgiving Day, November 26, 1953, among soldiers who were training here at Fort Jackson. The soldiers left the base. Now on base, they could ride in integrated buses. But when they went off base, they had to comply to the rules and laws of Columbia. And one evening, they go to the USO Club near Allen University and Benedict College. As an early part of the day, they went downtown to go to the movies. As they were leaving the USO Club, 50 soldiers, African-American soldiers, board a bus to head back to Fort Jackson. One of the soldiers sits next to a white woman. Now, why did he do that? I don't know. But what I do know is that it led to a whole lot of trouble. When he sat next to the white woman, she wanted to know where he was from. She said, here in Columbia, we don't mix. And so the bus driver then summons the Columbia police. And one of the only officer on board the bus, Second Lieutenant Oscar Sherrod, a native of Anderson, who fought in Korea, who earned a Purple Heart, intervenes on behalf of most of these privates. And in intervening, he is arrested and charged with agitating the others. So if you can imagine, that entire bus turns around, and the entire bus is taken to the Columbia Police Station, where each soldier is arrested and fined. But fortunately for us, the NAACP intervenes. And ultimately, the charges against these soldiers are dropped. We knew one name of a soldier, Oscar Sherrod, from Anderson, who later becomes an educator in Indianapolis. And just as Professor Myers' book was coming out, Mr. Sherrod passed away. So Professor Myers spoke to his widow. And for the longest time, there was a question about who were all of these 50 soldiers. And one afternoon, not too long ago, a woman calls me and says there's a guy who she plays cards with in Atlanta who claims there was a mass arrest of black soldiers in Fort Jackson. Do you know anything about it? I did not know anything about it until I read Professor Myers' book. His name was Robert Green. And Mr. Green has now talked extensively to us about what happened with great detail. And just the other day, he talked to one of our grad students. He's now 84 years old, who lives in Atlanta, who very much wanted to be here today, but his sickness prevented him from coming. But he asked us a few questions. He said, are any of those guys alive? He said, do you all have any records about what happened? And then he said, can I get my money back? And so I sent word to Mr. Green that we will work to identify those other soldiers. We do have some records that were just given to us yesterday, and we will see if we can get his money back. That's 1953. Now I want to conclude by talking about two other groups of individuals. So that's 1953. 10 years later, the Attorney General of the United States decided to make a trip to Columbia to talk about civil rights. The Attorney General was the brother of the President of the United States. The Attorney General's name was Robert Kennedy. Well, word got out that Kennedy was coming to Columbia. And a group of students in the newspaper, they were described as 22 Negro students. They decide to greet on April 25th, 1963. They wanted to remind him where he was. Mr. Attorney General, welcome to South Carolina, land of segregation and discrimination. And the other sign said, let there be justice for all. For us, it was a newspaper article and a photograph. Until one day, one of my close friends saw the photograph and said, I think I know some of those people. So here we are today honoring the past, acknowledging two of the women in this photograph welcoming Robert Kennedy. Miss Gloria Drury-Eady and Mrs. Vivian Thompson Colson. Thank you all for being with us today as well. This is a photograph of the young ladies in 1963, a photograph of them. Can you advance that slide for me? Here we are, these young ladies, last year, at an exhibit called Justice for All, an exhibit whose title was drawn from the sign they were carrying in 1963. That same year of 63, Dr. King delivers his famous I Have a Dream address at the March on Washington. He's joined that day by a young AME minister whose name was Frederick C. James. James was a native of Newberry, South Carolina. In addition to being in the March on Washington, he also joined Dr. King in Selma for the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. He also joins, could you advance the next one? He also joins Dr. King 55 years ago. 55 years ago, in the United States Congress, state capitol, the Voting Rights Bill was signed. The 13th pen given by Lyndon Johnson upon that signing was given to Frederick C. James of Sumter, South Carolina. Today, Bishop James is 98. He'll be 98 in April. And until yesterday, he had every intention of being here. But he is unable. Now, he especially wanted to be here for this occasion, but he was especially eager to speak to the commanding general of Fort Jackson. I tried to explain to Bishop James who the commanding general was. He said, "What's his name?" And he's a little hard of hearing. I said, "Beagle." Beagle. Spell it. I spelled it. He said, "Well, where did you go to school?" I said, "South Carolina State." And then he said, "Where are his people from?" I said, "Woodruff." I knew the answer. I said, "Woodruff." He said, "And you say he's an African American?" I said, "Bishop James, the last time I checked, he was an African American." So yesterday, the 98-year-old minister said, "Well, I need to see him for myself." So I promised him, General, that he would see you for himself. Today we celebrate these stories. This legacy, that Bishop James, next to Vivian Coaxum last year. These are stories to tell about the extraordinary journey that we face and the contributions of largely unsung figures in that story. Through the Civil Rights Center in Columbia 63, we seek to preserve these records so that others may know of the extraordinary journey that we face. Today we pick up the mantle and we move forward. It is our duty. It is our sacred obligation to honor these men and women who dare to believe in a better and more perfect union, who work to defend one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, Colonel Flesh and Command Sergeant Major Wetzel will present Dr. Donaldson with a token of appreciation on behalf of the soldiers and civilians of the United States Army Training Center and Fort Jackson. The plaque reads, Thank you for sharing your views and perspective in support of the United States Army Training Center and Fort Jackson African American Black History Month observance. Your historical expertise was inspirational and greatly enhanced our knowledge on African American history. Strike strong, victory starts here. We would also like to present Orisi Risi African Folklore and Miss Irma Richardson of Longleaf Middle School with a certificate of appreciation for their contribution to today's celebration. The citation reads, in appreciation for your involvement in the 2020 Fort Jackson African American Black History Month celebration, your hard work was instrumental in celebrating the cultural heritage of African Americans and the 75th anniversary of World War II. The soldiers, family members, and civilians of the local Fort Jackson community are elated and forever grateful. Signed, Colonel Eric C. Flesh and Command Sergeant Major Roosevelt R. Whetstone.
And for the students of Longleaf.
Ladies and gentlemen, the commander of the 165th Infantry Brigade, Colonel Flesh.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again in closing for coming out and being part of our African American Black History Month observance. We could not have pulled this off without great contributions by a lot of different groups and individuals. And sir, Dr. Donaldson, thanks again. Like always, every time I'm around you, I learn a great deal. So thank you again very much, sir. I'll run through these groups real quick, and then we'll do a round of applause for all of them, because it is quite significant, all the folks that contribute each and every time we do some of these things. We'll start off, of course, by back in the corner, as always, the 2nd 82nd Band. Thank you very much. And all the folks helping bring things out and ushering the volunteers from our Sergeant Audie Murphy Club. Thank you. Also, we have our military community liaisons, and especially Mrs. Kelsey Carter, who helped bring in the grade school students and bring folks into these events. Thank you very much. All right, and she was already mentioned, but I have to mention her again by name. Sergeant First Class Jenkins, who helped throw this all together, standing there back at the other podium. Our 165th EO rep and all the EO reps, the great Fort Jackson. All right, lastly, again, to our MWR and the NCO Club, management and staff, thank you for hosting us today, putting on a wonderful event. Thank you. All right, I'm sure I probably missed somebody out there, but this has been a wonderful event, and we'll have to see in the end if we broke some record with the extra ticket sales and all the extra chairs that were moved in. We had to slide out here in front of the podium because of the number of folks that want to attend. And we see what the displays and the speech today, I know why. And thank you all again for attending. And just leave with victory. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the benediction given by Chaplain Frick.
Please join me in prayer. Let us go forth as the meek of the earth, and the poor in spirit, as those who mourn, having been comforted, as those who hunger for righteousness, having been filled, as peacemaker, full of God's peace, giving our lives for hope and justice with mercy. In your holy name, I pray. Amen.
This concludes today's events. We hope you have enjoyed the program. We would like to extend our heartfelt appreciation.